Welcome back, everybody. So when it comes to Canadian politics, it can often feel like we are on the outside looking in. Well, there's a new podcast called Humans of the House, and it wants to flip that script.
The show features candid exit interviews with former MPs, giving Canadians an extensive sneak peek behind the political curtain. We have the podcast host Sabreena Delhon in studio with us today, as well as two former MPs featured on the show, Lisa Raitt and Celina Caeser-Chavannes. It's great to have all of you here. Welcome. Sabreena, okay, understatement. Conversations around politics can be divisive and uncomfortable, but you see these exit interviews as like an antidote to that, right?
Yeah, you bet. Conversations about politics can be intimidating. They can be really difficult. But Humans of the House is not just about a party or a policy. It's about the human side of politics, which is something we can all relate to. So in our show, we interviewed a dozen former members of parliament. And because they're not in the job anymore, they can speak very freely, and they do. They share such powerful stories, not just about what needs fixing in our politics, but what's good and can be even better. You're going to hear MPs, former MPs, like you've never heard them before, being so open about their experiences that it wasn't uncommon for them to become emotional in our conversations. In the show, you're going to hear a lot of honesty and hope. And, you know, it's not from people who are observing politics, but from those who have lived it.
So let's get into a little bit of it, because we've got some of your guests from the podcast. Lisa, we're going to start with you. So you served as a federal cabinet minister and MP for 11 years. There's
a reaction.
I love that reaction right out of the gate. Now, you say you didn't experience gender discrimination inside the House of Commons. However, you do say it was getting there that was a different story. So can you explain that distinction for us?
Yeah, so serving Parliament, capital P Parliament, you get in there and you are paid exactly the same as the person sitting next to you. You had to go through exactly the same process to get where you are. You had to go through a general election. And you have exactly the same rights to stand up and speak in the House when you want to speak. That is all really good. That's where you feel equal. Celina and I were talking about it. I mean, in certain areas, you may not be as equal within your party, for sure. But in Parliament, you can. But getting there is tough. You have to make it through a nomination process, and that can be really unnerving and especially difficult if you're a woman, if you're racialized, if you don't have those connections within your community of the traditional politicians. It's really tough to get that nomination. But once you're there, you can make it work.
You know what, Celina, though? You know, your experience is a little bit different, maybe even the opposite from Lisa. So you served as an MP for 4 years. You say that getting there wasn't the issue. It was once you got there, you faced a lot of discrimination.
Yes.
Explicit or implicit?
I would say it's absolutely explicit. And so getting there, serving the people of Whitby, getting elected by a community that was wonderful to serve was the easy part for me. It was getting in and then noticing in retrospect, because you're kind of dancing around in your head. Is this really happening? Is this really what's going on? But noticing that I was picked to go to 3 events over the year as parliamentary secretary that were related to Black community. And then looking back and going, no, I wasn't imagining this. This is actually what happened. But knowing full well that you still have to navigate the political circus and still do your job as a member of parliament or parliamentary secretary in a way that upholds our democracy and upholds the truths and the trust that people have put into you in that particular role.
Fascinating. Sabreena, you're the executive director of the Samara Center for Democracy. And what I find fascinating is that your organization actually used machine learning, and you were measuring the toxicity received by political candidates on social media. I mean, you could just imagine, right? So you looked at that with specifically how that could be a barrier to civic engagement. So tell us a little bit about the biggest things that stood out to you from that research.
Yeah, we used a bot to track toxic tweets received by candidates in Canadian elections. And when we looked at the 2021 federal election, We looked at 2.5 million tweets. 20% of those were toxic. To break that down, 140,000 tweets contained sexually explicit content. Almost 300,000 contained threats. This is coming at just about 300 candidates, and that's not spread evenly. It's going to be disproportionately felt by people who are underrepresented in our democracy, women, people of color. And, you know, a startling and alarming finding there is just that it's normal. This is normal as a condition of work for people who are pursuing the role of being a politician. It's normal in other professions as well. Journalism and the media, I'm sure, is relatable for you too. And that's something we need to think about because it's gonna affect representation in our democracy. If you see someone from your community that's underrepresented, getting that online, you're gonna hold back from possibly voting, being civically engaged in other ways, and maybe running yourself.
So those are the statistics, but I think it's also important to understand how those statistics read while they were experienced by a real person, like you, Lisa. So what happened was that when you were an MP, you were the recipient of all kinds of toxicity, and you were even accosted in person. You received death threats. What protective measures were available to you?
So once the RCMP have determined that whatever threats you're receiving do show that there's a risk to the individual, and I was a cabinet minister at the time, they will go to your house and they'll take a look around and determine whether or not there's appropriate lighting. Do you have a safe room? Do you have a panic button? Those things were provided for me. They wanted to put like a 20-foot pole up in my backyard with a giant light on it. My neighbor said, "Oh, I don't think so, Lisa. That's not going to happen." So we tried that, and at the end of the day, I ended up having, because of the threat that happened for real, I had close protection, meaning I had an RCMP officer, but my kids were 10 and 7. And we were going to wrestling on the weekends. So the RCMP officer came with us to WWE. And I think they had a good time, you know? We didn't have to pay for his ticket.
I know, but that's your life. Like, that's your children, and that's the thing. A panic room in your house is not... That's your job, and that's, I think, what people need to connect here.
But it gets to, you got to be a really high level of threat.
Well, I mean...
Twitter doesn't cut it.
Twitter doesn't cut it. Celina, like so many MPs, and Lisa's story, you were also the target of violent threats as well. So what kind of protection was offered to you?
Yeah, so counter to or similar to Lisa, but I wasn't a cabinet minister, so my local police services, so I want to give a shout out to Durham Regional Police Services, who I had a panic button for what seemed like years because you're walking around with this thing in your pocket and you're afraid. You know, sometimes 10, 11 o'clock at night, it's freezing in Ottawa, you're shaking and you're afraid that you might just click the button, but you have to walk around with that. And the threat was against myself and my children. So we had posters put up in our local schools of the individual, and then of course that individuals are apprehended en route to Ottawa with a weapon. And so I do want to shout out to our local police departments, Parliamentary Precinct, and others who were involved in that apprehension. But it's a very real situation that I would never want to live through again, and it's making me emotional thinking about it now.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that's not easy to relive in any capacity. Well, Sabreena, it's clear that the working conditions in the House of Commons, there's many aspects of it that, you know, we've heard maybe are okay, but a lot that needs to evolve as well. So you've done these exit interviews, and you've done them for over 10 years, which is phenomenal. And so what do you see now as the urgent call that really perhaps is right at the top of the list that needs to be addressed immediately?
Yeah, the House of Commons, we hear this over and over again in our exit interviews, is that the House of Commons was built for a different time. And it's in desperate need of an evolution, and we need safe and sustainable working conditions so that we can attract and hold on to the leaders that we need. If we want more Lisas running, more Celinas running, others from the diverse communities that Canada has running and staying and representing our interests in the House of Commons, we need safe and sustainable working conditions for them, because what happens to them affects all of us, the people that they serve.
100%.
Lisa, quickly, the advice that you give people entering politics is to think about their exit plan. And we don't often really hear about what life is like afterwards. So what is life like after?
Unemployment, right away. That day that you run in the election and you lose, you don't get paid for that day. your employment is cut off. So my kids are behind me and they're celebrating because they're so happy I'm not elected anymore. But in the meantime, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
So you gotta make sure that you manage yourself when you're in the House to make sure that you can get a job after you're done in the House, because you will be done.
That's what people need to know.
Wow. Celina, it's wild because I'm hearing all of these stories, and yet you say it was 100% worth all of this trouble to have gone through this whole process in politics. So listen, there are women watching right now thinking like, could I, would I, should I?
Yes.
What's the advice to someone who might want to do this?
I would say run in packs.
100%.
Take the lessons that we've brought, that others have brought, add it to your skills, your expertise, and show up as 110% yourself, knowing that you deserve to be there. Run like you're hungry, run like wolves, run with compassion and care, and use all of that energy to change our democracy, because you add women, you don't only change politics, you change everything, if not the world.
Thank you so much, all three of you, Celina, Sabreena, Lisa. It's been great having you on the show, and we want to let our viewers know the first episode of Humans of the House out right now. Go listen wherever you find your podcast. We'll be right back.
Thanks for watching. We've got lots more discussion and debates on everything from food and fashion to pop culture and current events. Don't forget to click like and subscribe.